Hello everyone, this is PK Entertainment and we're back again, and here now we have another video review, and this will be a full-on spoiler review for Avatar The Way of Water. You can check out my non-spoiler review of the movie and I'll leave a link within the description, and this will be much more of a free-flowing discussion about the main standout elements of the movie rather than a chronological breakdown of the film. So this is your final warning now, spoilers ahead for Avatar The Way of Water coming up in 3, 2, 1. Now the first issue I want to talk about here are the villains, and it very much seemed like James Cameron couldn't be bothered to create more interesting antagonists, so he kind of just recycled the ones from the first film. In a very weird sit-up, we had the likes of Colonel Kodrich and his platoon being revived into Navy bodies from their memories. This was in anticipation that they would lose the overall battle in the first film. And to be honest, Colonel Kodrich was already a very cliched and cartoony character from the first movie, and this was really a wasted opportunity to develop these characters even further. There was no wanting to discover more about the Na'vi in terms of their identity or their powers, no need to discover more about the planet itself. No, all he wants to do is get revenge on Jake. Now, although they did hint at a father-son dynamic with the Spider Kid, that wasn't really developed too much at the end of the film. The same goes also for ID Falco's Colonel Aldemar. She was the main squad leader of the new invasion, and she was only really in the movie for about the first 20 to 25 minutes. And again, there was nothing else to her character. The only other human characters of any type of note were Dr. Norm Spellman and Mick Scoresby, who was the head of the hunting squad of the Tolkien whales. And again, both of these characters are very one-note, very typical personalities with no real depth to them. And I actually think in terms of this overall story, I think James Cameron made a big mistake. By just introducing the human characters invading the planet, basically just copying the plot of the first movie, I believe what he should have done is taken a hint from the second Apes movie, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, where with the first film we focused very much on the apes against the humans. The second film focused more on the civil war between certain apes and factions between the species. So that offered far more complex themes and interesting ideas in terms of the overall race. It just made it a far more interesting and different story. And I think it would have been far more interesting had the Na'vi tribe that Jake was leading come across a rival tribe and we had much more of a story about how life should be led within Pandora. I think that would have opened up far more possibilities. And I think, again, it's very typical of how we see so much effort being spent on the CGI and all the technology and less on the human characters. We then talk about the motivations of the humans, which just kept changing all the way throughout the film. First off, we want to get revenge against Jake. Then we want to completely take over Pandora because Earth has become desolate for some reason. Again, this was a concept that they don't really explain, and it would have been interesting had they explored this a bit more. And then later on, probably about 2/3 of the way through the film, we introduced the concept of another substance known as Artium, I believe. And this is a yellow substance that's extracted from the Tolkien whales when we're seeing that quite vivid sequence where they're hunting down and killing one of the Tolkien whales, and then they go inside its body and they start drilling inside it and they start leaking out this yellow substance. And apparently this is very important because it somehow manages to slow down and stop human aging. So on the one hand, we could say that this was a replacement for the first film where they were trying to mine all of the unobtainium, which strangely, again, they don't mention about this sequel. I don't know what happened to that overall substance. We just stopped talking about it. But either way, this part of the movie was potentially interesting, and there was some scope here for some ideas and concepts that could have had some substance to them. But Cameron just seemed to get completely lost, and really he forgot about all of these ideas, as once again he was overindulging in all of the underwater sequences. Now, some may say that these elements were left as potential setup for the upcoming sequels, but again, there wasn't really enough emphasis on them to be worth investing for if we do get further installments overall. And again, if we'd have just cut down on some of the swimming sequences and built a bit more on these ideas, then I think it could have carried more weight for the entire movie. We then talk about the movie's second third, and this is where the film really dragged too much in terms of the underwater scenes. And this was really concerning the arc involving Jake's son Luark, I believe his name is, and we spent this whole story of him connecting with one of the Tolkien whales. And it was this part of the movie that seemed to go on forever, and the story really stalled at this point. This is when I was kind of getting a bit frustrated when we were watching all of these constant scenes of him swimming with the whale, swimming inside the whale, swimming alongside the whale, touching and feeling and bonding with the whale. And it was all just so prolonged, and so much of this part of the movie could have been cut out. Yes, I understand they were trying to set up the whole concept of how the Navy were integrating with the water and connecting with the certain species, but it just went on for far too long and it didn't really have much bearing where we get to the end of the movie anyway. So again, this was all about Cameron showcasing all of the digital effects and motion capture and CGI at the expense of the entire story. So along these parts that could have been reduced, also I believe what could have been trimmed down was the over focus on the younger characters. And there was a point throughout this film where it very much felt like this was a more of a teen soap drama, where we see one of Jake's daughters, the adopted daughter who is connected to Sigourney Weaver's character. She had the connection to one of the Navy, and we see her getting bullied on with this scene throughout the beach, and then they have to stick up for her. We then have the rivalry with one of the teenage boys of Jake alongside the McKenna clan teacher. We have this constant back and forth where I think the younger sibling is not meeting Jake's approval. The older brother constantly has to save him and look after him. So we had all of this family drama and it just wasn't very interesting, and I just found this segment just completely boring. And I do understand on one sense that Cameron wanted to push these younger characters for any future potential sequels. But again, they just weren't really that compelling, and I struggled, to be honest, to remember any of their names. And there was a point throughout this story where they really took more dominance over Jake Sully, who was very much sidelined throughout the middle portion of this film. To be fair, he wasn't really that strong of a character anyway, but you would have felt that he would have had far more of a dominating presence throughout this film, but he kind of gets forgotten about for a certain part of the film before coming strong later on. So we then talk about the last third of the movie as the battle intensifies, as we see Kodrich tracking down Jake and his family. And yes, there was far more spectacle, far more drama, far more tension and excitement. But at the same time, this last segment of the film as well dragged on for far too long. It must have gone on for a good hour, as we had all of these chases and huge battle scenes, constant Tolkien wells swimming over the ships and diving down into the water, and of course visually it all looks great on screen, no doubt about it, but again it doesn't really grip you, it doesn't really engage you into the story because it's just repetitive, the same thing again and again. And it has this tactic that we see so often within these blockbuster movies where we have a group of characters who could escape, but there's always one character that gets left behind, so they have to go back and save them, and it repeated the beats 2 or 3 times. And after a while you saw it coming that there was going to be a big character of death in the story. I guess it was because there were too many of them in the story to have them all survive. So we knew at some point there was going to be one big character that was going to meet their death. And of course it turns out to be one of Jake's son, the older sibling, as they were rescuing the spider boy, who again was a very strange character. I'm still not convinced about that setup in terms of that role, but they go to rescue him and they start swimming in the water, and then when they come out of the water on the other side they see him being shot. And yes, it does have some emotional impact as we see the mother crying over the dead son, and this is then when we get the confrontation between Jake and Kodrich. So after all the intense fight sequences, everything is rounded up nicely, where we see the daughter who was connected to Sigourney Weaver's avatar. She manages to bond with the underwater organisms. Again, they were playing this right throughout the movie. She saves all of them underwater, and then they all come together. They have a funeral scene for their son, who embeds himself into the planet underwater, and then that's when the movie ends overall. So as I mentioned in my non-spoiler review, I do think was visually impressive, and we expected that going in. It was just dragged out for way too long. I'm still firmly of the belief that had this been trimmed down to 90 to 100 minutes, I think it would have been a lot more leaner, it would have been a lot more punchier and quicker and had far more impact. It would have been a bit more compelling, and also had they really developed much more of the concepts that they hinted at halfway through the movie in terms of the other substance, and also why Earth has become this desolate planet, that they have to search for Pandora. Again, why do they have to search for Pandora? Why can't they search for other planets? This isn't explained. But again, Cameron just wasn't interested in any of this. I think he just used this all as a kind of excuse in many ways, just so he could indulge and have plenty of underwater sequences and just showcase a lot of the CGI and technology. But to be honest, that was much of the same criticism that I had within the first film. So really, this was a sequel that really kind of committed the same sins and had the same flaws as the first movie. I just think the difference was that the first movie, there was a certain awe because we hadn't seen effects and scenes like this before. But of course, when we come to the second film, we've already seen it, so that awe and that majesty isn't quite there this time round. And of course, that really unnecessary 3-hour runtime, it just didn't need to be that long, especially if we've got future installments. I really hope that they don't turn out to be 3 hours, because they're going to lose the general audiences, and it will be interesting to see As we look at the box office performance, will that 3-hour runtime affect the overall box office takings? But I will do a further report on that when we get the opening numbers in the next upcoming days. So that's it really in terms of my spoiler review of Avatar: The Way of the Water. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Which parts of the movie do you think worked as well, and which parts of the movie did you think didn't work as well? Let me know in the comments, and as I mentioned before, we will do some further reporting when we get the first opening box office numbers and we start to get some indication as to how big a movie this will be in terms of the financial success. So look up for that on the channel, and also if you have any other suggestions in terms of movies, television series, or any other issues within the entertainment industry that you'd like to see me talk about, then also drop me a suggestion in the comments, and I'll see if I can provide further commentary for you on those topics within the future. And please also hit and like the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you very, very soon.